CHLP. I'm excited to welcome you today to this webinar. We'll be here focusing on the important topic of aging with HIV. Specifically looking at the challenges related to housing, incarceration, and food securities. As we explore these issues, it's crucial to understand how aging impacts the lives of many people in our community. So we're honored to have three right now, exceptional people with us today. So we have Kae Greenberg. He is the staff attorney at CHLP, and he'll be sharing the insight from CHLP's newly released legal primer, which is so amazing. The primer is geared towards people aging with HIV. This primer dives into the unique challenges faced by growing populations of older Americans living with HIV. And today's webinar is an opportunity to highlight this valuable resource. In addition, we're joined by our fantastic panelists. We have Kerry Thomas from Zero Project and Shekinah Rose from Positively Trans, and they'll be introducing themselves shortly. So to kick it all off, we're going to start with Kae. And Kae, could you please provide an overview of the primer and walk us through the sections that it covers so everyone can have a better understanding about the primer? And introduce yourself.
Hey, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's really exciting to have people here to talk about the primer and talk about this obviously really important issue. So as Davina said, my name is Kae Greenberg. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for HIV Law and Policy. I've been there about 2 years now. Prior to joining CHLP, I'm based out of Philly, so I did direct services. So I worked as a tenants defense attorney in eviction proceedings for about 5 years, and I served as a public defender in Philly for about 5 years. So had a bit of a variety of work experience. So like Davina mentioned, so I'm just here to provide a brief overview of the primer, which is a document that CHLP just released. And at the end of the presentation, there will be a QR code where you can get a direct link to the primer, or you're able to access it and a whole bunch of awesome other resources at CHLP's website. I'm not going to be delving deep into any of the legal issues that are dealt with in the primer. That's like a multiple day, conference. This is just to kind of let you know what's there. So, potentially there may be answers to some questions that you and the people you work with are facing, or you can pass it on to people who'd be useful. Because again, the whole reason this exists is to be useful. The information in it is only as useful as if it's in the hands of people who need it. So please share it far and wide. Again, like I mentioned, this is an important issue. And it is an issue that is about a population that is not much discussed, but is becoming a larger population daily. As of now, 50% of people living with HIV are over the age of 50. As of 2030, 70% of people living with HIV are over 50. Now, you might ask why the statistic is over 50. It has to do with the fact that physically, many people living with HIV are considered aging after the age of 50. You might have heard of like Social Security 62, 65, things like that. It's actually really important to make that distinction, because one of the issues that's dealt with in the primer is the fact that many services for aging people are geared towards people in their early to mid 60s and later, whereas many people who are aging with HIV need access to those services earlier in their lives. And then also it's important to highlight the unfortunate disproportionate nature of who acquires HIV because who is made vulnerable to it through the policies and things that exist in our country, which is 38% of people currently, as of 2022, which was the most recent statistic I could find, 38% of people living with HIV are Black, which also impacts the numbers that are in both of those statistics, and also impacts the ways in which many of the government policies and many of the anti-discrimination measures and things like that interact with the people living with HIV. So again, it's important to kind of highlight some of these statistics and demographics to ground what the primer is talking about and also what we'll be talking about. So this is, like I said, this is a brief overview of the primer. I'm not trying to go in depth at this moment into any of the laws. So at the Defenders, you learn that people like things in threes. So the primer was built in the rule of three, which is there are three sections to the primer, each of which focuses on a different area of law. The first is dealing with federal laws that protect people aging and living with HIV from discrimination. The second is, and as far as I can tell, is the first resource to focus on this, the criminalization of people living and aging with HIV and the collateral consequences of the criminal legal system. The reality is, because of all of those intersections of the statistics I kind of mentioned earlier, that a lot of people aging with HIV are going to be people who have a criminal record, be it new, be it old, be it based on their HIV status, be it not based on their HIV status. And the third area is protecting the people living and aging with HIV to make decisions about their health and medical care. Each section of the primer is also then broken into kind of three large areas. One is description of the common legal issues. And then I tried to provide areas of self-advocacy. So basically things that people living and aging with HIV can do to try to put themselves in the best situation dealing with all of these problems that the primer is talking about, because knowing about the problems is only, again, as useful as if there's at least some ideas of the solutions. I'm a lawyer. I tend to go very much into the negative very, very often, but I tried to fight that impulse in this primer. And then third part is areas of focus for advocates. So again, the primer is primarily geared towards and supposed to be a resource for people living and aging with HIV, but it also has information and resources for people who their clientele or the people that they work with or that they love in their family are living and aging with HIV. And then the areas of law that I mentioned are federal, because CHLP is a nationally based organization. However, many of the laws that we're talking about are actually state-based. So we tried to do state highlights. So these are the states that are highlighted in each of the sections. We tried to do a kind of a good cover of the nation. All right, and I am gonna go forward. Again, this is a kind of walk through the primer. So the first section, when we talk about the federal anti-discrimination laws and remedies, these are a bunch of the different laws that are dealt with in that section. It's just a list of it. Each is dealt with in depth. Each section of the primer, the idea is that it is an independent. So for example, it's a 76-page document, but you can go to look at the area that might be relevant to your questions or your issues. For example, all of the footnotes and citations even restart. They're supposed to be really independent sections from each other. So if you notice that there's redundancy, that was purposeful. And for anyone that decides to read it front to back, I apologize if you hear the same information more than once. And then this is an example of some of the information that's given about the Americans with Disabilities Act. So for those of you that may or may not be aware, living with HIV is a covered disability under the Americans with Disability Act. And there are three different parts to the Americans with Disabilities Act. The primer goes in depth into each. I just tried to provide like a quick little highlights just in case people are interested at this webinar. And I will say that these laws and these protections have real impact on people's lives. For example, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act says that government agencies themselves can't discriminate against people living with HIV based upon their HIV status. For any of you that have heard about stuff that's going down in Tennessee with their aggravated, to use the word of the statute, aggravated prostitution statute, there's still an ongoing lawsuit because the DOJ agreed with CHLP, which actually filed complaints, that having additional penalties for sex workers who are living with HIV is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So these statutes and part of an attempt in this section to make it the statutes and the laws useful to people, as I tried to provide literally step-by-step how you can file complaints yourself if these are issues that you're dealing with, and at least as up to date as the publication. Okay, so then, like I said, the second section is dealing with people living and aging with HIV who have criminal records. It is one of the first, if not the first, resources to address this issue. The first part of this section kind of deals with what I would call setting up the problem. So it basically looks at these intersecting populations that are listed here to show why it seems like statistically that this is going to be a large part of people living and aging with HIV. And you're going to hear a lot more about this later from one of our amazing speakers. And then in this section, so I said I followed the rules of three, except for in this section where I kind of crammed in a fourth section because housing seems to be a consistent issue that people living and aging with HIV are facing into accessibility of housing. So there's a lot of, in this area, that steps through private housing and then different forms of subsidized housing, different forms of public housing, senior housing, and different funding areas. Again, on the federal level, because a lot of programs are state-based or even local-based. Like, for example, I live in Philly. There's things that are open to people in Philly that are Philly-based. But it tried to at least get an overview of the ways in which living with a criminal record impacts your ability to access housing. And then the last section addresses protections for decision-making power. So people living and aging with HIV unfortunately have to deal with many ways in which their decision-making power can be stripped from them. Some of which is, guardianship, or conservatorship, or what happened to Britney Spears, whereas someone steps in as your decision maker. There's also ways in which getting access to public benefits and what you have to do to get access to public benefits limits your ability to make your own decisions in your life. The primer steps through stuff like that, but then again, it also tries to step through steps that people can take that are proactive to try to preserve as much of their decision-making power as possible, even if that preservation is deciding who makes those decisions for them and providing those people with the guidance to make those decisions in case they're incapable of making it later on. So there's information about various documents and techniques that you can do to try to preserve that for yourself. And again, to give an example, like I mentioned, that there's a bunch of states that, it's like kind of specific states that are dealt with in this. In this case, dealing with decision-making power, I dealt with Texas, which is in 2015, they were actually the first state to recognize the validity of supported legal decision-making agreements, which were traditionally more informal agreements as to how decisions would be made and what levels of support someone would need to help make those decisions to avoid things like guardianship, where there's a legal stripping of that decision-making power. And then it deals a little bit with some of the updates to the law. So this is kind of an example of those state-specific things. And I think I came in just under the wire of 10 minutes, so I'm going to take a step back and let my co-panelists speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Kae. Thank you so much. And everyone, we did put the link in the chat, so you can go ahead and check out the primer. It's amazing. So, Kerry, let's talk a little bit. introduce yourself, give it a minute or so, and then we'll go into the questions for you.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I'm Kerry Thomas. I'm the Zero Project's decriminalization strategist. I'm also a person with lived experience. I've been with Zero now for just coming up on a year, and prior to being a staff member, I served on the Zero Board of Directors for, believe it or not, for 12 years. So it's been a long relationship with them. As I mentioned, I'm a person with lived experience. I've been for 36 years, so that's over half my life, pretty much all my adult life. This topic is so powerful to me because I just had a birthday a week ago Wednesday where I turned 60 years old, and so I'm right in that that ballpark of all things we're talking about. Appreciate that. And I'm also a survivor of HIV criminalization. I served 15 years in the custody of the Idaho Department of Corrections. And although I've been out for now coming up on a year. I was released last September. So it's coming up on my 1 year anniversary, which I plan to do. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to do something kind of special for that. And then it's this topic is so powerful because although I'm no longer behind bars, I'm still in custody. And what I mean by that, I'm no longer in the Idaho system has closed, medium, minimum, and community custody. So I'm still in community custody. And so all the ramifications that I experienced while I was incarcerated, still some of those barriers are there. I mean, I'm not complaining. I mean, to be able to have time to spend with folks like I'm doing today, to be with my family, all those things are great. But I really want to paint the picture when we're talking about aging, live with HIV and aging in prisons, how the once you have a felony history, how that extends post-release as well. So, and it's really powerful when you think about the 70% of the people living with HIV are projected to be over the age of 50 here coming up pretty quick. And so that stat is interesting because it kind of mirrors what's going on inside the facilities as well. Because our prison population, and we could talk about the facts of prison at another time, but our prison population is also aging. And so it's really hits home with me because after 15 years, there's folks that I know that with lived experience and without lived experience that are still there, that are over the age of 50, over the age of 60, 70, that are close to being released. So what do we do? So I wanted to touch on HIV and aging in prison and what it looks like when folks are coming back. So two kind of areas: what it's like while you're there, and what it's like when you come back. And I just want to highlight a couple points, and then maybe for a later discussion. But the basic of prison, there's very limited access to healthcare. What I mean by that, most states, to my understanding, and Idaho falls into this category, we've outsourced our medical system to private industries. What that means is that they are profit driven, and so the goal is to do as little as possible for the population. So that way you get limited HIV medical services, and when it comes to specific HIV, trying to find an HIV provider with a physician assistant, no matter how well intended, it's kind of apples and oranges. And so the idea to get specialized care while you're inside the facilities is a challenge. Yes, most states will have access to medication, but as we know, folks that live with HIV were much more than our viral load and our CD4 count. There's more to living a full life than simply the quarterly blood draw to check your blood count. While those are important, the overall issue is not being addressed, specifically mental health. So although corrections are good at what they do, they lock people up. It is not a mental health facility, or is it designed to be a mental health facility? So along with the aging and things that come along with getting along inside a facility, there's a lot of isolation, there's this stigma, there's mental health services are very limited. In my experience, when I reached out for help, the questions are asked: Do you have any thoughts of harming yourself or others? If the answer is no, pat on the backside, go about your day. We'll see you in 2 to 3 months. So there isn't that interaction. So you're required to do a lot of those things on your own. Also, and inside the facilities, the comorbidities aren't addressed inside the facilities. What I mean by that is you're aging, other things such perhaps as cardiovascular disease or diabetes or cognitive decline, all those things that may come along with aging with HIV are not addressed inside the facilities. And then, of course, what we can imagine is the idea of nutrition and exercise are very limited, specifically in the area of nutrition. Everything's on a budget. And so therefore, the quality of nutrition that's important to maintain a functioning life, one of the areas of HIV and aging is not going to be met. So that's inside the facilities. So if I could paint the proper picture here, and so there's, for me, and all I can do is share my own personal experience. And for me, it was about not scratching and clawing, but trying to get the things in place in order to prepare for a potential release. What I mean by that is I'm a big believer that reentry has to start on day one. As soon as you're in a facility, whether you're doing 15 days, 15 years, or anything in between, or anything longer than that, you have to start thinking about what's available a post-release. And as prepared as I was, I still wasn't prepared enough. When you're looking at the healthcare continuity, how do you transition from care that's limited inside the facility to finding a treatment provider when you get out right away? And without having that continuity, that there could potentially be lapse in medication, which we know causes issue down the road. There also could be access, depending on where you transition to. Different communities are going to have different levels of access, what can directly impact that transition period. What I did is the first thing I did, I thought that, well, in order for me to survive and live a full life, I have to have a baseline evaluation of where I'm at health-wise. So I did as much work as I possibly could do, but I was very fortunate. I had the help with the Serum Project and other outside entities to help put that in place. The overwhelming majority of folks that are being returning to the community, they don't have that kind of support. And more, the facilities are giving less and less opportunities for people what they need to do in order to transition. The number one issue, I was going to go on a little tangent there. We'll probably save that for another time. But another number one issue that I'm noticing is housing. Part of living a full life is having permanent housing, which is different than a halfway house or even transitional housing. Most communities, that is the access to the house, even if you're for someone who's in their 20s, 30s, is a challenge. When you're looking at the aging population with the different levels of care that are needed, in addition to a person with lived experience, that raises the opportunity of finding housing less. The ramifications of not having clear housing or permanent housing, it directly affects your ability to get services. Well, oftentimes what we're finding is that if you're living in a transition or a halfway house, some of the services or some of the programs you're not eligible for because they need a permanent address. They don't consider halfway houses or transitional housing as permanent housing. So number one, it affects your ability to get treatment and to get access to the programs, even if they are available. In addition, oftentimes there's stipulations on when folks that are released, whether or not they can return to their family or not, based on the specific statute that they're incarcerated under, so that if they have a felony conviction, they're not eligible, even if the family members are living in a program house that's getting resources. If the person returns to the family into that house, they're not allowed to stay there and they'll lose their funding. So you're asking folks to basically have two rents or two mortgages in order to reunite the family, which is primarily the main portion of support. So stable and supportive housing has to be a part of that. Because if I don't have the housing and I don't have access to medical care, then my chances of going back to old past behavior or even getting myself in a situation to be dependent on services that are limited becomes an issue. Also, of the support systems. Are we developing? I love Kae's primer on this because it directly attacks this issue. What is our support system going to be? Oftentimes, and my personal opinion is that although I have family support, I had to rechange what I meant by support. My son, after 15 years, does he support me? You bet. Does my sister support me? You bet. But the issue when we're talking about support and family networks, my son needed me to be a father and a grandfather. He didn't need me. I don't need him, and he doesn't need me to be the primary provider for my services. And we're asking the families to take on the burden when people that are returning to the community, they need to be the father, the grandfather, the husband, the wife, the son, the mother, all those things. That's what the family role needs to be. I jokingly, when I'm talking to DOC officials, as I say that although I love my son, he's very supportive, he is not a dentist. He is not a care provider. Support means and support networks, what is in place for when the folks are have their issues, that they have that person. And we need to start devising the system to look at it that way as far as support. Yes, family can be supportive, but they cannot be the primary support. And there's very limited community resources that we're finding out. Or they're not organized enough to one-stop shopping, if you will, the referral system, to have a database of folks where to go, which is one of the things that Cyril is currently working on to develop such a system. All this continue has a ripple effect, and it comes down to employment. Again, if we just look at the housing aspect, oftentimes employers want to know if you have a permanent address. Also, yet the permanent address for as far as employment goes, if you want to establish a credit, or to be able to, you have to have permanent housing. So the bank requires it, your employer requires it, and also programs require that you have a permanent address. And without that, what I'm observing, the ripple effect starts to happen, and people are left without the accommodations at all. And I like the idea of workplace accommodations. Having that conversation, to being a person with lived experience with your employer, and still maintain your anonymity, is a challenge. On a personal note, some of the I was going to say restrictions, some of the requirements of my parole, there was an issue that I needed to disclose to people who were in a group setting. I personally felt that's not appropriate, because it's not, you can't require someone as a condition of their parole with lived experience to disclose their status to strangers. And so we were able to navigate that and work that out. But again, I think I'm fortunate to have the support so that put me in a position to have those conversations. But how many folks that are lifting, especially if I'm a younger person and I'm a sex worker, am I able to have those conversations with authority? I'm looking at staying in prison or returning to prison, or I'm looking at having my rights violated. Where do I go to get that kind of help? When we're talking about the workplace accommodations, all those have to be taken into place. And then also the mental health aspect we touched on before. It has to be directly addressed. So finally, there's got 5 things that we can look at as far as support systems, and I kind of piggybacked a lot what Kae what he did a great job in the primer in discussing. Number one, we have to have reentry programs, and again, reentry starts on day one. If the idea that we're going to wait till individuals are released and back in the community before we start a reentry the reentry process, we're setting them and ourselves up to fail as a society. I come from a place, I think that it has to be a community effort, that all caretakers, including those that are returning to the community, have a role to play in that. And it's important that we establish the reentry early on in the process. For folks that are aging and live with HIV, that reentry process has to begin with HIV support services while they're inside the facility. We have to start connecting the dots, because we know generally what county, city, state folks are returning to. And so we have to make a better effort, or not even better, an effort to connect them with the HIV specific care while they're incarcerated. Healthcare providers have to do their part as well by opening up and giving people opportunity to have in a confidential way in order to discuss the things that we're going to need while we're inside the facility, and then definitely post-release. Social services has to be another part of that as well, and that we're securing benefits, we're securing housing, we're securing all the necessary support are in place prior to someone returning back to the community. And then finally, I believe that it has to be some sort of legal aid as well. We have to have that voice that we're willing to speak on behalf of, that are going to know the issues when he's talking about all the issues that are involved to get folks to prison, and then once they're released from prison, how do we maybe perhaps get the criminal records off my record? How do I deal with discrimination? What's discrimination look like? What's it smell like? What's it taste like? All those things have to be addressed as we're going along. So I think that based on my personal experience, and it is a day-to-day learning experience, I'm learning more and more each day, and it is overwhelming. Sometimes it's disheartening, to be honest, but other times it's also encouraging, where we get opportunities like today to share the reality, what it looks like when you're aging, live with HIV, and return to the community. And I'm not something that's unique to me. It's something that's true across the board. And so hopefully at the end, if there's any questions, we'll feel free to share more information or to answer any questions for clarification down the road.
Thank you. Goodness, thank you so much, Kerry. Kerry said a lot. He said a lot. He talked about mental health. He talked about aging, reentry programs, Medicare, employment, transitioning, comorbidities, I think that being in prison, a lot of us, we don't know what someone goes through being in prison, and the things that they need once they are released. So thank you so much for all of that, giving us that insight, Kerry. And if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. Shekinah, let's go ahead and let you speak, introduce yourself for a minute or two. And then the question that I have for you is, what is clean slate, and how does it impact people living with HIV who are aging?
Thank you, Dee. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be calling in from. My name's Shekinah Rose. I use pronouns she, her. I'm with Positively Trans. We are a national advisory board, both for people of trans feminine experience as well as trans masculine and gender non-conforming across America. I'm a person of lived experience. I have been living, surviving, thriving now for 39 years, probably another 3, because we didn't have testings, remember? I was diagnosed in 1985 with HIV. And so I've spent quite a bit of time, both here in the US and in Australia, being an HIV advocate, activist. And I'm back in the US, in Pennsylvania. I reside in Pittsburgh. I'm currently a Pennsylvania HIV Planning Group Steering Committee member, as well as an Intersectional and Innovation Subcommittee co-chair, and on the Employment Working Group. I wear a few hats, folks. I'm also the co-chair of the Pennsylvania the HIV Justice Alliance. We are trying to desperately work at decriminalizing HIV in the state of Pennsylvania. I'm also involved with the Pennsylvania Governor's Office LGBTQ Aging Working Group. And so a lot of the topics that Kae has presented in the primer, I have been working with all of these organizations to highlight the importance of aging with HIV. It's been probably 2 years in the making with the Pennsylvania HIV Planning Group. And some of the topics that Kae has presented are certainly ones that I have advocated for. I want to thank the governor, Josh Shapiro, for taking everything on board in terms of aging and HIV in the state of Pennsylvania, and has actually prioritized us as a group in the state of Pennsylvania in the Aging Our Way, which is a 10-year master plan, which I've been a part of. So I'm going to try and tackle the question that I've been wanting to answer We have 78 million people in America who may have an old criminal record. I couldn't begin to tell you how many people in Pennsylvania may still have that conviction, which could include incarceration, probation, fines, penalties, summaries, misdemeanors, and even felonies. Clean slate was a policy that was developed in Pennsylvania back in 2018 as a need to really address all of the concerns that everybody was like recognizing for people who have faced incarceration, have felonies, have misdemeanors, who have been impacted not only by housing but employment, being able to attend university or college, to be able to move forward in your life. You've paid your debt to society. And so clean slate is a policy by which certain criminal records are automatically sealed by the state. And so for the first time in Pennsylvania, many felony convictions can be sealed after 10 years. Most misdemeanor convictions can be sealed after 7 years. All summary convictions will be sealed after 5 years. Some of the felony and misdemeanor offenses that would be sealed are like drug crimes, theft, including retail theft and receiving stolen property, trespass, forgery and fraud, bad checks, ID theft and welfare fraud, criminal mischief, conspiracy to commit eligible crimes, a DUI, simple assault, disorderly conduct, harassment, terroristic threats, reckless endangering another person, resisting arrest, possession of an instrument of a crime, and sex work. So as you can see from the list, it's quite possible during the course of your life that you've encountered a situation and you find yourself now with a conviction. And so the Clean Slate program allows for people to have their records sealed, and it's done automatically. MyCleanSlatePA.com is a website that is available for people in Pennsylvania, and that includes people aging with HIV who may not know if their record has been expunged or sealed. And so you may be able to provide all of the details that My Clean Slate PA is asking for, and then within 24 hours, it will provide you with a report. Clean Slate is a really great opportunity for people aging with HIV who may have never imagined that they would be able to go back to school, maybe look for additional housing or different housing, maybe never believing that they could own a home. So by having these records sealed, a possible employer won't be able to see, in fact, any of that. You may be able to, go to college at a time when you didn't think you would be. I'm not going to cover why people have acquired a criminal conviction. I think that I'll leave that for Kae and others. What's really important, though, I think, for all of us is that this is a tool, right? And tools need to be shared. They're no good if they're sitting in a drawer and just taking space. We need to get this information out. Other states can look at how it's run so that we can incorporate it in other states throughout the United States so that people are living well and thriving while we're aging with HIV.
Thank you. Thank you so much, um, Shekinah. So you did explain. I want to tell you thank you first of all for explaining what clean slate is, and letting us know what convictions can be sealed in Pennsylvania, but also touching on that people aging with HIV can take advantage of the clean slate program there in Pennsylvania. So thank you for that. I have a question for Kerry and Shekinah, and I want to ask you. I'll say that we must work together to address many challenges for people aging with HIV. So, how do you believe we can collectively attack the housing concerns for individuals who are aging with HIV within the HIV community? Kerry, do you think you can answer that for us?
Sure, I think that's an excellent question, and all I can think of is from past experiences, because I think that the one thing I've learned with advocacy in general is that it's so empowering to have a role in my own recovery, if that makes sense, or my own life, and so giving folks the tools in order to self advocate is the key. But how do we do that's the issue? How do we get people know that there is a safe space where they can develop the skills to be a self advocate? That seems to be that's the challenge, and that's the hurdle that needs to be out, because the level of stigma and discrimination is so powerful, and I lived it and understand it. Why folks are a little bit hesitant? That stove's hot. I'm just trying to get food on the table. I'm just trying to feed my kids. I'm just trying to get back and forth to work on it and just swing the feet out of bed and get going. And so why do I want to put myself out there if I'm going to be stigmatized? So I think that some way to develop the space, and I think there are the spaces out there that I'm aware there's many spaces out there, but helping people to become self-advocates, I call it in short, each one teach one. If I get somebody, I grab one more person, that person grabs one more person, that's when the coalition is set, and that's when change is going to be made. And I think that, and I'll say it out loud, that Shekinah is one of my biggest heroes in this area, because when you look at all the things that she's involved in, she's putting herself out there. And that's the role model. And those are the type of things, those are the type of examples that we need in our life, that I need in my life. And that's the way that we accomplish that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Shekinah, do you think you can go ahead and answer that question for us?
Oh gosh, Kerry, thank you for
Yeah,
putting me some flowers there. He's right. Housing is like something I'm passionate about. And I'm not going to speak to, I think what Kerry has shared is really important from a community level. From the perspective in which I view the question is maybe going to come from a different point of view. So I'm a policy person. I love policy. I believe in policy. I love developing policy. So working in the governor's, I can only speak to Pennsylvania, right? And it's universal. So we have identified housing as being a #1 priority in the state of Pennsylvania. We have far too many people who are aging in our state. We are the 5th largest population of people aging in the nation here in the United States. And we're just now trying to figure it out, right, folks? So you got people like me who are adamant about making sure that the people that are falling behind us do not fall away. We need to provide solutions now. And part of that is around, we've looked at on a state level here, low income tax credits to start to develop housing with developers who can benefit from low tax income credit so that we can start to develop housing specifically, like allocated to people aging. Wouldn't that be great to like be able to like create a community just for aging and people with HIV? There's lots of different avenues that people can look at. Not all are socially economic viable for all community members, but we have to look at everyone who lives with HIV as tailoring their needs to who they are, right? So you may be able to live in your home, but you need other avenues to stay in your home. That's just as important, right, as having a house. Like if you can't get somebody to come in to clean because your disabilities are limiting you to be able to do that, then that becomes a barrier to your well-being as well as a potential like opportunity for you to have falls. We already have aging with HIV. Some of us have cognition problems. So we want to avoid any kind of living environment where it actually is the problem. So good housing as well as appropriate housing. There is a program called SHARE that's available across the United States, and I'm encountering more people that are accessing it. So for maybe perhaps family members, or there is part of the Department of Aging offers this as a support mechanism for people who are unhoused, right? So you get to, it's called the SHARE program, and you work with the Department of Aging. They connect you up with a potential homeowner who, you know, you may be able to mark services with in order to make and come to a mutual agreeable like understanding of what housing is. I've even gone so far as to ask the director here in Pennsylvania, transactional sex can be a part of that. So, you know, we may be aging with HIV, but we're not dead. Just saying.
So we're
So,
not. We're not.
so you know, that's a possibility. There are other. We got to get out and bang the drum on HUD and HOPWA. You know, we need to increase the amount of funding available for HOPWA, period. 20% more people by 2030 means that there's going to be that many more people who are unhoused. We're seeing increases right now across the country of LGBTQ people who can no longer afford housing. Housing costs are shifting people and causing people to become unhoused. And we're criminalizing now people who are unhoused in certain states. And so, you know, I work really hard every month to make sure that that topic does not go away. And, you know, certainly your churches, your community can be a benefit. You know, hit me up for resources if you'd like. I'm certainly available.
Thank you. Thank you, Shekinah. And thank you, Kerry. So you both touched on a couple of things. Kerry talked about working to help and show others how to self-advocate. And Shekinah, you talked about barriers to our well-being and having appropriate housing. I also have another question for the both of you before we end this. Again, we don't have any questions, but if you guys do have any questions to ask, go ahead and put them in the chat. and we'll work on answering those for you. So what are your guys' thoughts on the primer? And what section, resonated with each of you? Kerry, you can go ahead and answer that one first.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, Kae, what a excellent work. And I think because reentry for me is so fresh, the criminalization aspect and what we can do about that. But what I've also noticed is that I have the privilege to work with out-of-department corrections on the reentry program and the reentry services and what that's going to look like. And so, and they've been a willing partner, and I'm thankful for that relationship that we've been able to establish. But also it's and reference to the primer when you're talking about criminalization. And I think that in some of the conversations that we've had, what are we doing before that? What are we doing? What's in place? What do we have in place to avoid folks having to go through that part of the system? And so the primer, when I read the primer, I read into that. What are our safety guidelines to prevent the situations that we're coming into down the road? I think as far as my health, as being a person with a lived experience, everything's about prevention. And so the whole through the primer, you do a great job of stating what the problem is. And I know that the conversations we've had, you'd like to go a little bit more detail what the problems are. But the part that stands out is that the hope that there's solutions that we can do to prevent things that are happening in the first place. And I think that, and that's like an overall, I know we're running short on time, but I know that's the overall takeaway for me for the primer. It's like, yeah, we got to have the history, we got to have the why, we got to have the cruddy stuff that's going on. But there's such a sense of hope I get from it that there's some concrete things that we can do. And so I guess what I'm saying is what we're talking about, what advocates can do. That's the part that stands out to me.
Thank you. Shekinah?
Okay, so the whole primer is just brilliant. It's of its time, and I'm just so ever grateful for CHLP, Kae in particular, and creating this like living document that will live on, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to expand it and enlarge in the number of states that are participating. That would be one of my goals I would like to see. In terms of the primer itself, I so many people don't have resources, right? Or don't know where to go. And CHLP is such a nationally recognized organization that, you're going to be the go-to, on this topic. And I'm so grateful to be a part of it. I think moving forward, for me, as I read the primer, I saw so many opportunities for us to share with the community. We can get into the nuts and bolts of the nitty-gritty of developing strategies, how to share with people, like how to make that work. And not only that, but to go, you can do this. This isn't too big. And because oftentimes advocacy can feel quite large, and it's not until you actually break things down and the reality starts to set in that I got this.
Yeah, of course you do. Of course you do. So, Tez, hello there.
Hey.
We're about to close soon, but I can ask you the same question that I asked Kerry and Shekinah before we get off of here, and that question is, Tez, all of us are working together, to address challenges for people aging with HIV. So, how do you believe we can collectively attack the housing concerns for people aging with HIV within the HIV community?
I think it's going to take raising awareness amongst the community about what's available, and also the reality that there's a lot that's not available. And how we accomplish that part is the big nut to crack. I live in San Francisco. We have a few homes for HIV and aging, people, older adults with HIV, and even older seniors, but we don't have enough. And I think for a lot of cities, that may be the same situation. They say they have programs available for folks, and yet they are full, waiting lists for a year or two. So I mean, I think that the thing to do is to kind of advocate and do a campaign about, housing as healthcare, if you want to call it that. But I hate that cliche. But it's vital to our well-being and community and keeping us from being isolated and feeling alone. So I know that it's important work. How we do it is by bringing together the organizations that are much more prevalent now than they were a few years ago around this topic of HIV and aging, and making it a priority, a campaign about priority, and then really honestly tackling the issues of not having enough.
Thank you so much, Tez. So we have a couple of questions, and then we'll probably go ahead and close after this. I want to answer at least some of them. Kerry, this one is for you. They tell you thank you for speaking. They say self-advocacy is very important, and some individuals may need guidance in developing this too. They say that they believe that each one teach one is essential, but there is a pre-level of self-discovery to become confident in self-advocacy and more. We are dealing with this in our community of same gender loving men of color who are aging. And then they say that this area still has stigma or fear. And how do we get past that phase? He wants to know.
Yeah, you bet. I read, and I think it was David put that question, and that was an excellent question. And the elevator pitch answer to that is that's one of the things that we worked that I was participating in the Idaho Department of Correction, is that we were self-motivated and we created our own peer support system, and which I'm proud to say that post-release there's daily or by the month more people that were involved in that program. What started off literally as a bunch of knuckleheads sitting in a multi-purpose room saying we just want a little bit better than this, now is in every department, every prison inside the Idaho system, and then also a post-release. And so that, and all they did was take just two guys. I don't like how we're living, and we got another guy. There was 4 or 5 of us sitting in a room, but we had to really. We have the freedom to go online and start taking classes in order to train ourselves how to be self-advocates and how to address some of the issues that David brings up. That it is true, that it is, so that level of self-discovery has to take place, and we have to have the number one thing, a safe environment to do it. Until we start creating the safe space, I'm just on how am I going to, and the prison is a perfect example of this. If you're running around just trying to keep your head from being bashed in, you're not ready to do any self-advocacy stuff. You're just trying to breathe in and out. So and that translates into the community as well, until we create safe spaces where people can have that moment to exhale and breathe, David's exactly right. We're not gonna make any changes. So I would say, David, that we got to start creating the safe spaces where people know that they will not be stigmatized in those areas.
Absolutely. I love that, creating those safe spaces for people so they can be able to be open enough to be able to share as well. I'm going to go ahead and read another question. So it is Anita. Let me see if I can. Anna, I'm sorry about that. She says, thanks for sharing this great conversation. And CHLP has done amazing work with state coalitions to reappeal and modernize HIV criminalization laws. And I agree with you. They sure have. She wants to know, she says, but people may not realize that these laws are not usually retroactive. What can we do to ensure that people with prior HIV criminalization convictions get relief as part of these reform efforts. Now, I don't know if this question is for Kerry or for Kae. So either one of you could go ahead and answer.
That's a Kae question if I ever seen one.
Yeah, it's a Kae question.
I'm gonna get back. Go get them.
All right. I am going to take 1 second just to say something else that I was thinking of that's off question, but I have the control over the mic button, so forgive me. I just also wanted to say, like, everyone was saying really nice things about the primer and what's in it, and like, you know, I was a baby gay raised on like things that ACT UP did. Like, none of this shit would be possible without the people on this call and a lot of the people who are watching this bringing these issues to the attention of, like, you know, people like me. So it's really nice that people are saying nice things, but like, you guys are the kick-ass rock stars, as far as I'm concerned. And on that note, so it's interesting. I think it gets, it's kind of like when we work on changing laws and modernizing things and stuff, we talk about a lot about making sure when we're doing something that we don't leave the most vulnerable behind. Like, if we essentially deal with something that impacts and makes things better for the most vulnerable, kind of everyone else will also benefit from that. So I know, like, in Pennsylvania, we were dealing with the fact that there was, looking to change the laws, that there was some kind of gnarly kind of stuff. I honestly can't remember what it was at this off the top of my head. Statutes or case law that pushed against being able to make things retroactive. But that's where the power of things like Clean Slate and programs that just do mass expungement come together. So, for example, if people living with HIV fight for programs like that, that will benefit large swaths of people, it also has benefits, things as well, and blanket benefits. And like Shekinah walked through a lot of the stuff that Clean State is in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of information on that website that she mentioned that is about how the program is being rolled out nationally. And if you're sitting here being like, well, in my state, that wouldn't be possible. You know, Pennsylvania is purple. And it was passed unanimously in the Senate by the time it went to the Senate. That meant that a lot of hardcore Republicans were behind it. So there are ways of getting things like this through very adverse systems. So I would say that the strongest thing where there might be in a specific statute, it might not be able to deal with retroactively in a specific statute, trying to get these trying to deal with things as a more global issue. At least that's my 2 cents. And I speak for myself also, just me, Kae.
Thank you, Kae. So we're gonna close. First, I want to say, don't forget to go to CHLP, HIV Law and Policy.org/about, and you'll be able to pull up the primer. It's the first one when you go on there. Like Shekinah said, it's a live document, and it's something that we've needed for a very long time. Thank you so much, CHLP, for putting this document out there. Thank you, Kae, for all of your work. Thank you, all of you here, for all of the work that you do. And the primer touches on things like housing and incarceration and food insecurity for people who are aging with HIV. I'm aging with HIV. All of us here on the panel who are living with HIV are aging with HIV. And that has always been something that has been a fear of mine, but now I know it's something that I have to face. So I want to tell everybody again, thank you for joining us. And remember to check out CHLP's legal primer document. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.